Americans pour over $50 billion every year into dietary supplements, powders, capsules, cold-pressed extracts and elegant glass bottles with maximum markup. Meanwhile, the most translated book in human history names specific foods that fed armies, drove economies, and treated battlefield wounds. Foods modern science keeps circling back to. The distance between what ancient people ate and what we buy isn't a gap in knowledge. It's a gap in attention. Today we're walking through 12 foods that appear by name in biblical scripture, not as metaphors, but as actual crops people grew, traded, and lived on. Stay with me to the end because number 1 shows up over 140 times in scripture, and what science has uncovered inside it may permanently shift how you think about inflammation and aging. And don't miss number 7. Most people have had this in their kitchen for years without knowing what its active compound does, or that it only forms after a specific physical action. Near the middle of this list, we'll pause at a moment from 2 Kings. A dying king, a prophet's strange prescription, and a recovery modern biochemistry can now explain compound by compound. Don't drift past it. Let's begin at number 12. Number 12. Dates. The survival food that kept civilizations moving. The date palm appears across biblical scripture more often than nearly any other fruit-bearing tree. Deuteronomy lists dates among the 7 sacred foods of the Promised Land. At Elim, the Israelites camped beside 70 palm trees. The Egyptians, Mesopotamians, and Nabatean spice traders all built the same dependency on this fruit. 3 civilizations, separate traditions, identical conclusion. Modern nutrition confirms why. Dates are calorie-dense and shelf-stable for months without refrigeration. Their natural sugars absorb quickly for fast energy, but the insoluble cellulose and soluble pectin slow that absorption enough to gentle the glycemic response. Quick fuel without the crash. They also deliver magnesium, potassium, copper, manganese, and B vitamins from a single piece of food small enough to carry across desert terrain. Researchers have identified more than 15 polyphenol inside them. One area where research has produced consistent results is dates and late pregnancy. Multiple controlled trials show women who ate dates regularly in the final weeks before delivery had better cervical dilation at admission and shorter first-stage labor. The mechanism appears to involve oxytocin receptor sensitivity. Ancient midwives prescribed exactly this without a single double-blind study. Almost no modern source mentions the pits. In traditional Arabic medicine, they were dried, ground, and used for gastrointestinal infections. Date pit extract contains tannins and saponins with documented antimicrobial activity. 3 to 5 whole dates as a pre-exertion fuel source eaten slowly. The traditional way to break a fast across cultures, precisely because the slow fiber buffer makes them ideal as a first food. Number 11. Pistachios. The nut a patriarch thought worth offering a king. Genesis 43 verse 11 holds a quietly revealing moment. Jacob, with his family facing starvation in a regional famine, sends his sons to negotiate with the Egyptian official who controls the entire grain supply, and tells them to bring pistachios as the gift. A man bargaining for survival chooses pistachios as a currency-grade offering to a ruler. That's not the choice of someone treating a nut as a snack. Babylonian records show pistachios cultivated in the Hanging Gardens. Persian royalty held pistachio groves as exclusive royal property. Chinese traders called them happy nuts. Modern science explains the verdict. Pistachios contain the highest concentration of lutein and zeaxanthin of any commonly consumed nut, the primary protective carotenoids for the macula. Regular consumption is now linked to reduced risk of age-related macular degeneration. Their protein profile is unusually complete, containing all 9 essential amino acids in meaningful amounts. What surprises researchers is the gut microbiome effect. Multiple studies show pistachios increase bifidobacterium populations more than most other nuts tested. The reason is structural. The fat is partially encased in cell walls human enzymes can't fully break down, so some passes through intact and feeds colonic bacteria rather than being absorbed. That's why they provide more satiety and fewer net calories than the label suggests. Eat them raw or very lightly roasted. Above 150 degrees Celsius, polyphenol begin to degrade. Number 10. Barley. The grain of common people that outperforms everything. Barley was never the prestigious grain. Wheat belonged to the affluent. Barley fed soldiers, sailors, and laborers. When Jesus fed 5,000 in John's Gospel, the loaves were barley loaves. They were eating one of the most cardiovascular protective grains ever studied. Barley contains the highest concentration of beta-glucan of any grain on earth. The FDA has approved a specific health claim for it because of how strong the clinical evidence is. Inside the digestive tract, beta-glucan forms a thick gel that slows glucose absorption, binds LDL cholesterol and removes it before reabsorption, selectively feeds beneficial colonic bacteria, and stimulates macrophage and natural killer cell activity. Head-to-head against oats, barley consistently produces better post-meal blood sugar results, with a glycemic index well below whole wheat and white rice. The preparation distinction most people miss: hulled barley versus pearled. Pearling strips the outer bran, the layer where most beta-glucan, B vitamins, iron, and zinc concentrate. If you've only seen pearled barley, you've been using a processed version. A thick porridge of whole barley cooked slowly with broth was a staple from the Middle East to East Asia. Every culture that grew it landed on the same preparation. Number 9. Pomegranate. The antioxidant that decorated Solomon's temple. Solomon's temple pillars were carved with 200 pomegranates. The high priest's robe in Exodus 28 was embroidered with alternating pomegranate figures and golden bells. Egyptians buried the fruit with their dead. Greek tradition tied it to immortality and the underworld at once. Ayurvedic medicine used it for digestive inflammation and parasitic infections. The science centers on punicalagin, which exists in meaningful concentrations in almost no other food on Earth. The gut microbiome converts it into urolithins, which show consistent anti-inflammatory effects, mitochondrial protection, and in lab studies, the ability to selectively induce apoptosis in certain cancer cell lines through mechanisms researchers call significant enough for continued investigation. Clinical trials with pomegranate juice have shown reductions in systolic blood pressure, less LDL oxidation, improved arterial elasticity, and lower C-reactive protein. The polyphenol concentration outranks red wine, green tea, and blueberries. Now what almost nobody discusses: the rind. The thick, bitter outer skin everyone discards contains the highest concentration of tannins, ellagic acid, and antimicrobial compounds in the entire fruit. Traditional healers brewed dried rind as a tea for intestinal infections, and that same rind is now being studied against antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Dry it in a low oven until completely hard, break it into pieces, steep in barely simmering water for 10 minutes. It's bitter, but the medicinal concentration is dramatically higher than anything in the seeds. Number 8. Garlic. The food the Israelites wept over in the wilderness. This may be the most emotionally resonant food moment in Scripture. The Israelites are wandering, freed from slavery, fed daily by manna from heaven, and they hit a breaking point. Numbers 11:5, they weep over the fish of Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. Adults who just escaped forced labor weeping over garlic. If you understand what it does to the body, the grief becomes rational. When garlic is crushed, the enzyme alliinase converts alliin into allicin, one of the broadest spectrum natural antimicrobials ever identified, with documented activity against bacteria, viruses, fungi, and certain parasites. It disrupts multiple microbial pathways at once, which is why resistance is so hard to develop. The detail that changes how you use it: allicin is volatile. Heat above 60 degrees Celsius begins destroying it. Boiling annihilates it. Raw and cooked garlic are not the same food medically. Egyptian medical papyri list garlic in over 20 preparations. Hippocrates recommended it for respiratory infections and parasites. Roman soldiers received it as standard rations. Controlled trials confirm regular consumption reduces upper respiratory infection frequency, lowers LDL and blood pressure, reduces platelet aggregation, and supports hepatic detoxification enzymes. A method most people haven't tried: crush 1 or 2 raw cloves and let them sit exposed to air for 10 full minutes before using. That rest allows the alliin to allicin conversion to complete more fully than crushing and immediately cooking. Number 7. Figs. The prescription that saved a king. Here's the moment we promised. 2 Kings 20. King Hezekiah is dying from what the text describes as a severe wound, a boil or infected lesion. The prophet Isaiah doesn't only offer prayer, he gives a specific medical instruction: a compress of mashed fresh figs pressed onto the wound. For centuries readers treated this as symbolic. Then researchers analyzed fresh figs biochemically and discovered Isaiah's prescription had a precise compound-by-compound rationale. Figs contain phycin, a proteolytic enzyme that breaks down dead and damaged protein tissue, debriding a wound biologically, the same fundamental action modern wound care uses enzymatic debridement agents for. Fresh fig latex inhibits multiple bacterial strains and accelerates early inflammatory resolution. Figs also contain psoralens with antimicrobial and antifungal activity, and benzaldehyde, studied specifically for inhibiting bacterial biofilm formation, the structure that makes wound infections so hard to treat. As an internal food, figs are unusually mineral-dense. Calcium content in dried figs is high for any fruit. They're rich in soluble pectin, potassium, magnesium, iron, and B vitamins, a combination that, in a world without supplements, was close to a complete daily intervention. Eat fresh figs at peak ripeness for maximum enzyme content. 3 to 4 dried figs daily through seasons without fresh fruit. For topical use, mash ripe figs into a paste and apply to minor inflammation, insect stings, or early-stage infected wounds. Isaiah didn't guess. He prescribed. 2,700 years before enzymatic debridement became clinical protocol, the prescription worked. If this resonates with you, hit like and subscribe. What's coming in the second half goes even deeper. Number 6. Lentils. The meal that changed a birthright. Genesis 25. Esau returns from the field starving. Jacob is cooking red lentil stew. Esau says, "Let me eat some of that red stuff for I am exhausted," and trades his birthright for a bowl. This is usually discussed theologically, but it also reveals how intensely satisfying that pot smelled and tasted to a depleted man. That craving doesn't happen without a body that knows what the food provides. Lentils are among the oldest cultivated crops on Earth, a staple across ancient Egypt, Greece, Rome, and Mesopotamia simultaneously. A single cooked cup contains roughly 18 grams of protein and 16 grams of fiber, a combination producing prolonged satiety and stable blood sugar few foods match. The iron is substantial, and the vitamin C naturally present in lentil preparations significantly enhances absorption. One serving covers nearly 40% of daily folate. Blue Zone's research identified legumes as the single most universal dietary commonality across every long-lived population studied. A preparation detail most people overlook: soaking for 8 to 12 hours and discarding the soaking water substantially reduces phytic acid, which binds to iron, zinc, and magnesium. The ancient practice of soaking grains and legumes, present in nearly every traditional food culture, was achieving exactly the mineral bioavailability enhancement modern biochemistry recommends. They didn't have the word phytate. They had the practice. Number 5. Onions. The prebiotic that paid the pyramid builders. Onions appear alongside garlic in the Numbers 11 lament, mourned by name. A historical detail most people haven't encountered: Egyptian laborers building the pyramids at Giza were partially paid in onions and garlic. Inscriptions list these as formal compensation. When the civilization building the largest structures in the ancient world pays its workers in a food, that food isn't optional nutrition. Onions are among the richest dietary sources of quercetin, a polyphenol with documented anti-inflammatory, antihistamine, and antioxidant properties. Hundreds of studies show measurable reductions in blood pressure, inhibition of the NF-κB inflammatory pathway, and stabilization of mast cells driving allergic response. Quercetin's bioavailability rises substantially when consumed with fat. The Mediterranean practice of cooking onions in olive oil was doing this intuitively for thousands of years. Equally important is the prebiotic fiber content. Onions are loaded with inulin-type fructans that pass through the small intestine undigested and selectively feed bifidobacterium and lactobacillus in the colon. The ancient Israelite diet, garlic, onions, leeks, all alliums, all rich in inulin, was systematically building a gut microbial community modern medicine recognizes as central to immune function and metabolic regulation. A detail almost no source mentions: the papery brown outer skin contains the highest quercetin concentration in the entire onion. Traditional Central European cooking added onion skins to stock specifically to deepen color, achieving quercetin extraction without knowing it. Simmer clean dry skins in water for 20 minutes and use the liquid as a cooking base. The taste is mild. The polyphenol content is not. Number 4. Raw honey. 3,000 years in a tomb and still edible. Honey appears in scripture with a reverence no other sweetener has matched. A land flowing with milk and honey. Jonathan eating wild honey from a forest floor in 1 Samuel and his eyes brightening, not sweetness, restoration. The ancient world used it to dress wounds, preserve foods, embalm bodies, and sustain travelers. And archaeologists have found it. In Egyptian tombs over 3,000 years old, sealed jars of honey still edible. Not preserved, edible. No other food on Earth has been found with that stability. What they had was one of the most rigorously studied natural antimicrobials in scientific literature. Raw honey kills antibiotic-resistant bacteria including MRSA through 3 simultaneous mechanisms: Glucose oxidase generates hydrogen peroxide on contact with tissue. Low water and acidic pH create an environment most pathogens can't survive in, and a defensin-1 protein actively dismantles bacterial cell walls. Manuka honey is now used in certified medical wound dressings in hospitals across multiple countries, not as complementary medicine, but as standard protocol for burns and infections that haven't responded to antibiotics. The most important word is raw. Heated above roughly 40 degrees Celsius, glucose oxidase denatures, defensin-1 degrades, the volatile antimicrobials evaporate. The clear, perfectly pourable honey on most shelves has been heated in ways that strip its medicinal value. What you want is raw, unfiltered honey, possibly cloudy, possibly crystallized, never heated above the temperature of a warm beehive. 1 tablespoon at the first sign of a sore throat works because it actually works. Number 3. Almonds. Sacred architecture built around a nut. When God instructs Moses on the menorah in Exodus 25, the cups are shaped like almond blossoms, every cup, every knob, every flower. When Aaron's rod buds overnight in Numbers 17 as a sign of divine authority, it produces specifically almonds. The almond was chosen for these moments of highest theological significance for reasons the ancient Israelites understood through observation. The almond tree is the first to flower each spring, blooming while everything else is dormant, the emblem of life anticipating what hasn't yet arrived. A single ounce delivers approximately 37% of the daily intake of vitamin E in its most bioavailable form, alpha-tocopherol, the fat-soluble antioxidant that embeds in cell membranes and defends against lipid peroxidation, the oxidative damage implicated in cardiovascular disease, cognitive decline, and cancer development. Whole food vitamin E is substantially more effective than supplemental alpha-tocopherol alone because the full tocotrienol family in almonds works synergistically. A serving also provides roughly 20% of daily magnesium, a mineral participating in over 300 enzymatic reactions whose deficiency is associated with anxiety, impaired sleep, elevated blood pressure, and impaired glucose regulation. What surprises even nutritionists is the skin. The brown papery skin contains a complementary set of polyphenol, flavin-3-ols and flavonols that blanching erases entirely. Almond skins specifically demonstrate prebiotic properties, feeding gut bacteria the internal fat and protein don't reach. Eat them whole, raw, or very lightly dry roasted, never above 150 degrees Celsius. Number 2. Frankincense and its forgotten food relative. Most people know frankincense as incense, as one of the Magi's gifts, as the resin burned in temples. Fewer know it was also consumed internally, and fewer still know its botanical cousin is now the subject of serious pharmaceutical interest. Frankincense comes from boswellia trees across the Horn of Africa, Arabia, and the Indian subcontinent. In Ayurvedic medicine, the resin known as shalaki was used internally for joint inflammation, digestive disorders, and respiratory conditions. In traditional Somali and Ethiopian medicine, small amounts of resin were chewed and swallowed. Modern biochemistry has isolated boswellic acids. AKBA, acetyl-11-ketabeta boswellic acid, is the most pharmacologically active and has been the focus of substantial research over the past 2 decades. AKBA inhibits 5-lipoxygenase, the enzyme that produces leukotrienes involved in asthma. Unlike many anti-inflammatories, it inhibits this pathway without blocking the protective prostaglandins that aspirin and ibuprofen suppress, part of what makes it pharmaceutically interesting. Clinical trials with standardized boswellia extract have shown reductions in knee pain in osteoarthritis patients, reduced symptoms in ulcerative colitis, and improvement in asthma control. Results consistent enough to motivate active drug development at multiple pharmaceutical companies. The men who carried frankincense to a manger were carrying something every culture along the Silk Road recognized as medically valuable. Number 1. Olive oil. The ancient world's most complete medicine. There's a reason we arrive here last, and a reason olive oil is referenced more than 140 times across Scripture. Kings were anointed with it, an act of consecration but also of physical healing, because the skin absorbs its polyphenol at measurable levels. Wounds were dressed with it. The menorah burned on it exclusively. In Luke 10, the Good Samaritan pours olive oil and wine into the wounds of a stranger left for dead. This is presented not as exceptional care but as competent care. Luke, the physician writing that parable, was describing a wound treatment using 2 substances modern research has validated. He wasn't using metaphor. Extra virgin olive oil is one of the most rigorously studied foods in nutritional science. The Mediterranean dietary pattern with olive oil at its center has been examined in hundreds of trials and is consistently associated with reduced cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, cognitive decline, and all-cause mortality. The primary compound is oleocanthal, a polyphenol operating through the same COX inhibitory pathway as ibuprofen. The peppery burn at the back of the throat in fresh extra virgin olive oil is oleocanthal activating the same receptor ibuprofen activates. Chronic low-grade inflammation is now understood as the underlying driver of most modern degenerative disease. A daily food that suppresses it through the same pathway as a pharmaceutical, without the gastrointestinal side effects, is not minor. Olive oil also contains hydroxytyrosol, one of the most potent naturally occurring antioxidants identified, with a rare ability to cross the blood-brain barrier. Most of what's sold as olive oil in grocery stores isn't what the ancient world used. It's frequently harvested late in the season when polyphenol content is lowest, often blended with refined oils, and processed with heat that degrades oleocanthal and hydroxytyrosol. What you want is cold-pressed early harvest extra virgin olive oil from a producer providing harvest dates, deeply green, peppery, slightly bitter. 1 tablespoon in the morning on an empty stomach. Use generously but not above 180 degrees Celsius. Applied directly to skin for moisture and barrier protection. The ancient world poured this over everything: bread, vegetables, legumes, fish, and study after study reaches the same conclusion. They were right. The most important thing I want to leave you with isn't about any specific food. Every item on this list has a commercial processed imitation on a grocery store shelf. Clear, filtered, heated honey stripped of antimicrobial activity. Olive oil blended with refined seed oils. Pearled barley with the beta-glucan-rich bran removed. Roasted, salted almonds heated past the temperature that preserves vitamin E. The processing that makes these foods shelf-stable and infinitely reproducible at industrial scale is precisely what strips the active compounds making them medicinal. Stability and convenience require removing the volatile, enzymatically active, structurally complex elements, exactly the elements doing the biological work. The ancient world ate whole foods, unrefined, consumed close to the source. Not from ignorance, because the results of not doing it were immediately visible in the people around them. The question worth sitting with isn't, which of these should I add to my diet? The question is, in how many places am I consuming an imitation of something that used to be medicine, and calling it the same thing? If this opens something up, tell me in the comments which food surprised you most. The fig compress a prophet prescribed for a dying king? The pomegranate rind everyone discards being the most concentrated part? The almond skin's prebiotic properties blanching erases? Drop it below. I read every one. Subscribe and ring the notification bell. The next video goes deeper into the preparation traditions modern research is now confirming were biologically meaningful. See you there.